Hello, this is part 3 of anti-infective drugs. So we've talked about bacteria and drugs that are used to treat bacteria, both antibiotics and other types of antibacterial drugs such as sulfa drugs. Now we'll look at some other types of microorganisms. So viruses are not considered a living organism. They can't reproduce on their own, and they are simply a protein coat that surrounds some bit of genetic material. So whether that's DNA or RNA, or it's just a DNA core, it's not even entire DNA. So they're very simple, and as I said, they're not considered a living organism. The way that a virus works is that the viral particles, which is this little protein coat with its genetic material inside, enters a host cell, so one of your cells. And then it takes off its protein coat, it inserts its genetic material into the host cell's DNA. It allows the host cell's DNA to reproduce and reproduce the viral bit also. And then it repackages its new reproduced little viral genetic materials. It puts a protein coat around it, and then the particles exit the cell. And then many viruses will then destroy the cell. And we call those lytic viruses, so that they destroy the cell upon leaving. Sometimes viruses will reproduce and make their little packages and then stay inside of the cell and remain dormant and then become lytic later on, where they will then destroy the cell. So antiviral drugs are drugs that are used to combat viral illnesses. We don't have a lot of them. Normally our immune system takes care of viral infections fairly competently. However, with the epidemic with AIDS, where a person's immune system is very compromised, then there's been a lot of research into antiviral drugs. So largely due to research with that particular virus, HIV, that's where we've discovered new antiviral drug mechanisms. So many of the antiviral drugs are still very new, many are still patented, and so there are no generic brands that are available. So antiviral drugs could work by combating this process at any one of these stages. So there are some drugs that block the virus from entering the cell. There are some antiviral drugs that prevent the virus from uncoating its genetic material. Some antiviral drugs prevent the replication of the genetic material, and some antiviral drugs prevent the release of new viral particles. This is a picture of viral particles that are leaving a host cell. Now, viruses multiply very rapidly, and so that's why that a drug has to be given very, very quickly. So usually within about 48 hours of the infection. Otherwise, they're not going to be able to contain that rapid reproduction and release of new virus particles. So usually by the time symptoms of the virus appear, the viruses are so numerous that the drugs are not effective. We do have antiviral medications in a variety of routes. So there are some topical ones, particularly for herpes virus, cold sores, that can be put on cold sores at the very beginning when a person feels that a cold sore is beginning. There are oral antiviral medications, and they can also be given intravenously. But if we take out or exclude drugs that are developed specifically for human immunodeficiency virus, there are only about 11 antiviral drugs that cover about 4 different types of virus. And those are herpes simplex virus, influenza, A and B virus, cytomegalovirus, which is from the same family as herpes. It's especially dangerous to a fetus, and respiratory syncytial virus, which is can be very serious, especially for very young children and infants. Often at the end of the generic names, we'll see VIR, which is very common, and that helps identify it as an antiviral drug. **** So vaccines are a very important drug that we can use to help reduce or prevent the symptoms of a particular virus. And we're going to talk more about this in physiology. What vaccines do is they stimulate our immune system to create antibodies. And those antibodies are in place should our body see that particular microorganism again. And so they help resist invasion by specific microorganisms and prevent the symptoms from occurring. It's very important that we have vaccines for infectious diseases that we cannot treat very effectively or are very serious, and so that preventing them is really the best course. It's not necessary to have a vaccine for every viral infection or bacterial infection for that matter. Our immune system is quite capable of taking care of lots of types of infection. But when we have a disease where even if we make it through the disease and then have our own active immunization from our immune system, that we maybe have permanent repercussions from that disease. So for example polio. And we'll talk more about how this works. It's essentially a vaccine is a weakened form of a disease antigen. Often it is dead, and so meaning that there is no risk of actually acquiring that particular disease. The body then reacts to that protein or that antigen. It creates antibodies, and if that antigen ever enters the body again, so if the body sees that microorganism again, the body's immune system antibodies are ready, they're able to fight it right away, and as a result a person rarely gets sick, or if they do, it's a much milder version. Some vaccines may contain live but very weakened antigens. Some vaccines can provide lifelong immunization with a single dose. Others require reinforcing doses, which is what we call boosters. So after several years, you need to have another shot to keep those antibodies primed. A vaccine is not effective if the microorganism mutates to create a different strain. So for example, we will never have a vaccine for the common cold because there are so many different strains that even if we vaccinated somebody against one, they're likely to get a different strain. This also comes back to the flu shot, in that sometimes that we get an annual flu shot against strains that are very effective, like this year for example, and then other years we end up vaccinating people against a strain that we don't see very much. Severe side effects to vaccines are rare, so you may get a little immune response as if you've been exposed to that particular microorganism. So you might get a slight fever or flu-like symptoms. You don't have the flu, it's just your body reacting against that antigen. Live vaccines shouldn't be given during pregnancy or to people who have a compromised immune system or who are taking high doses of corticosteroids. And there's a list of very common vaccines on page 121 of your textbook. When we talk about passive immunization, what we're talking about are injecting antibodies, or immunoglobulins is the fancy way of saying that. So antibodies are contained in the plasma of people or other animals like horses who have survived the disease, and they are selected based on that they have very high concentrations of these antibodies. And so if somebody is sick, we can inject their antibodies directly into somebody else. The effect of this isn't very long lasting, so usually the effect decreases over 3 to 4 weeks, but maybe that gives that person, buys them enough time for their own immune system to produce antibodies. We are able to measure antibodies in breast milk, and so this is how newborn infants receive antibodies and protection against some diseases in the first 3 months. This is what a human antibody looks like. Protozoa are larger microorganisms. Lots of different protozoa invade the GI tract. They can invade other vital organs such as lung, brain and liver, and they cause illness as well. This protozoa over here is called Toxoplasma gondii. It causes toxoplasmosis. That is a protozoa carried in feces, especially, for example, in cats, which is dangerous to pregnant women, so that's why pregnant women shouldn't change kitty litter. Again, this is our friend Cryptosporidium, and this one down here is Giardia, and both Cryptosporidium and Giardia cause GI illnesses, diarrhea, that sort of symptoms. Antiprotozoal drugs are drugs that treat protozoal infections, and many of these are often the same drugs that are used to treat bacterial infections. One I would like you to read about and make some notes is malaria, and that is caused by Plasmodium. There are different species of it, and that's a parasitic protozoa. So read page 123 of your textbook. So why did the fungi leave the party? Because there wasn't much room. There are lots of fungi jokes. A fungus is neither a plant nor an animal. It's similar to a plant, but it has no chlorophyll, and it can't make its own food through photosynthesis. So it's sort of somewhere in the middle. It gets its food by absorbing nutrients from its surroundings. Fungi can be multi-celled, like for example the mushroom, or it can be single-celled and can cause disease. So on the left here, this is Candida albicans, which is the type of fungi that causes vaginal yeast infections. And this is Trichophyton, which is the fungus that causes ringworm. Again, just like bacteria, some fungi are part of our normal body flora. Sometimes they can overgrow and cause an infection. Sometimes they overgrow because we are taking antibiotics. It gets rid of bacteria that are helpful, and then it leaves open real estate for fungus to flourish. The infections can grow in a variety of places: our mouth, skin, hair, or nails. This is kind of the same fungus that causes athlete's foot that can grow in nail beds. Again, usually fungal infections are annoying but not serious. What we see in the bottom picture, this is called thrush. This is a fungal infection of the mouth. More common in infants than it is in adults. Some, though, can grow internally and cause very serious illnesses if it becomes systemic. So antifungal drugs work by preventing the building blocks for fungal cell membranes, and as a result, the fungus dies. Lots of antifungal drugs contain the suffix azole, and that's one of the ways you can recognize those types of drugs. Parasites are organisms that live on a host with absolutely no benefit to the host. Usually, for humans, they're passed to humans in contaminated food. Some can enter the body through the skin, so for example, hookworm, but most enter through the GI tract. They can attach to the intestinal wall, feed on the bowel contents or blood supply, or they can infest the bloodstream, the muscle, or internal organisms. This one over here, this is pinworm. This is schistosomes here. They cause schistosomiasis. Interestingly enough, there's a flat male that carries the female, and it feeds and shelters her while she lays her eggs. So it's kind of an interesting relationship. This one is roundworm. The bottom one here is hookworm. This one here is lymphatic filariae, which we'll talk about a little bit later in physiology, and this bottom one is trichinella. Anthelmintic drugs are drugs that are used to treat worm infestations. They often work by either killing or paralyzing the worm, and then the worm passes out of the body in the feces. This is the end of our discussion on anti-infective drugs. Please contact me if you've got any questions about any of this course material, and this material will be tested on your online tests and in your midterm test. Thanks very much.